My wife revealed she was actually my sister. We've been married 7 years and have 3 children. She's my biological sister. Imagine this. You've been married to someone for 7 years. You have 3 children with them. You've built a life. You have a mortgage. You have routines. You have holidays. You have memories. And then, in a conversation that starts casual, your wife says something. She says, "I need to tell you something about my family, about my past." You think maybe she's going to talk about her estranged parents. Maybe she's going to say she found out something about her childhood. You don't expect what comes next. She says, "I think I might be your sister." And you laugh. Because it's absurd. It's impossible. It's so ridiculous that it can't possibly be serious. But she's not laughing. She says, "I'm serious. I think you and I are siblings. Biologically." Your stomach drops. She explains she found adoption records, or family documents, or something that suggested she was adopted. And when she looked into it, when she traced the paperwork, she found evidence that the two of you share biological parents. You've been married to your sister for 7 years. You have 3 children with your sister, and neither of you knew until now. This is a story about accidental incest, about discovering something so horrifying that it calls into question the validity of everything you thought was real. Okay, before I read this full story, I need to give you context and a warning. This is from our Best Off Redditors and our True Off My Chest. And when it was posted, it went viral because it's exploring something almost nobody talks about: accidental incest. This story covers a marriage built on unknowing family connection, 3 children born from that connection, the discovery that the marriage was between siblings, the legal implications of the situation, the psychological trauma of the revelation, how the family processes something impossible, the ethical questions about their children, the marriage's invalidation, the couple's relationship after the revelation, the pathway to moving forward in an impossible situation. What's important to understand is that neither person knew. They were separated at birth or adopted out. They had no reason to suspect they were related. They fell in love believing they were unrelated people. But when the truth emerges, everything changes. By the end, you're going to understand why this person posted this anonymously, why they're processing something so traumatic, and why the answer to "what do you do now" has no easy solution. This is dark. This is heavy. This is real human trauma. Let's get into it. I'm 38 years old now. When this revelation happened, I was 37. My wife, I'll call her Sarah, is 36. I grew up knowing I was adopted. My parents, the people who raised me, told me when I was 7 years old. They said, "You're adopted, and that's okay. We love you just as much as if you were biological. You're our son." I appreciated that honesty. I never felt less than because of it. My adoptive parents were loving and supportive. Sarah, as I knew her, was not adopted. Or at least that's what she told me when we met. She said her parents had raised her since birth. She had a normal childhood. She had a relationship with her biological parents. I met Sarah when I was 31 at a coffee shop. She was 30. We hit it off immediately. We started dating. After 2 years, we got married. After 3 years of marriage, we had our first child. Then our second. Then our third. Life was good, normal, happy. I had never thought to ask Sarah about whether she was adopted. Why would I? There was no reason to suspect she was anything other than what she said she was. We built a life together. We bought a house. We raised our children. We made plans for the future. And I loved her. I genuinely loved her. In 7 years, that didn't change. This is the key thing to understand. These two people loved each other. They weren't related as far as they knew. They built a life based on believing they were unrelated. About 6 months ago, Sarah's adoptive mother passed away. When they were settling her estate, sorting through documents, Sarah found adoption papers. Not her adoption papers. Papers for a child. A male child. Born to Sarah's biological mother. Adopted out when he was 6 months old. Sarah's biological mother had never told Sarah that she'd had another child. She'd only raised Sarah. But there were records of another child. A boy, adopted out in 1986. Sarah was born in 1988, so her biological mother had a son in 1986. Then had Sarah in 1988. The son was adopted out. Sarah started investigating. She looked up adoption records. She found the adoption agency. She started trying to trace where the boy had gone, and slowly she started to wonder, could this be me? Could I be related to this woman's son? She started asking my adoptive parents questions. When was I born? What was my birth date? Do they have records of my biological parents? My parents, I think, didn't initially connect the dots. They just answered her questions. They're open people. They gave her information, and Sarah, through various means, some legal, some not, found records that suggested I was that child. Born in 1986, adopted out when I was 6 months old. To my adoptive parents. She cross-referenced dates. She looked at biological markers. She found enough to believe, with reasonable certainty, that we were siblings. And then she told me, "When you learn information this massive, how do you even process it? How do you respond?" We were sitting on our couch after the kids were in bed. Normal Tuesday night. Sarah had been quiet all day. I'd asked her a few times if something was wrong. She said she needed to talk to me about something important. I thought maybe she was unhappy. Maybe she wanted to talk about our relationship. Maybe something with the kids. I was not prepared for what she said. She said, "I found out something about my family, about my past, and I think it affects us." I said, "Okay, what is it?" She explained the adoption papers. She explained that her biological mother had had a son before Sarah was born. She explained that the son had been adopted out. I said, "Okay, that's interesting. What does that have to do with us?" And Sarah said, "I think you're that son." I laughed. Because it was absurd. There were probably thousands of boys. Adopted out in 1986. What were the odds that one of them was me? But Sarah didn't laugh. She was serious. She laid out the timeline. She showed me the dates. She showed me the documentation she'd found. Birth date, mine matched. Adoption agency, matched. Biological mother's information. Matched what her parents had told her about her own biological mother. The pieces fit together. I said, "This is insane. This is a coincidence. These dates could match for hundreds of people." Sarah said, "I know, but I kept investigating. And the more I investigated, the more it seemed like it couldn't be a coincidence." I said, "We need a DNA test. We need to be absolutely sure before we assume anything." Sarah said, "I already did one." I said, "What?" She said, "I took a DNA test," and I had it analyzed. And the results show that we share 25% of our DNA. That's sibling-level DNA. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Sarah said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know if I was right, but I'm almost certain now." I said, "How long have you known?" She said, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She'd known for 3 weeks that she thought we were siblings, and she hadn't told me. I said, "We have to do another test. We have to be absolutely certain." We did 2 more tests. DNA tests through different companies. All of them came back showing sibling-level connection. We were siblings, biologically, without a doubt. At what point in hearing this information would you have broken down? When would you have realized the magnitude of what you were being told? I don't remember much about that night after Sarah told me. I remember feeling like I was outside my body, like I was watching myself hear this information, but not actually experiencing it. I remember standing up and pacing. I remember saying, "This isn't real. This isn't happening." I remember Sarah crying. She was devastated. She said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you." I remember thinking, but now what? We had 3 children sleeping upstairs, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. We were married. Our marriage was based on a false premise, not because we lied to each other, but because we didn't know a fundamental truth about who we were to each other. I said, "We can't tell anyone about this." "Do you understand? Nobody can know." Sarah said, "I know." I said, "The marriage? Is our marriage even legal?" I didn't know. I assumed that if it was discovered that we were siblings, the marriage would be invalidated. But I didn't actually know the law. I said, "We need to talk to a lawyer." Privately, without anyone knowing why. Sarah said, "Okay." We spent that night not sleeping. We sat in our living room. We didn't talk much. There wasn't anything to say. The next day, I called a lawyer. I said I needed to discuss something confidential, something that couldn't be shared with anyone. The lawyer said he understood client confidentiality and could help. I met with him alone. I explained the situation. I said, "If 2 people are married and discover they're biological siblings, what happens to the marriage?" The lawyer was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's a complicated situation." He explained that in most states, marriages between siblings are voidable. They can be annulled, but the process is complicated, especially when there are children involved. He said if this situation became public, you'd likely face scrutiny from Child Protective Services. The children's status could be questioned. The entire family structure would be under investigation. I said, "What if we don't tell anyone?" The lawyer said, "If you don't tell anyone, you're continuing a fraudulent marriage. If it's discovered, the consequences could be severe." He said, "The responsible thing would be to seek an annulment, but that would require disclosure. It would require legal proceedings. It would become public record." I left that meeting feeling trapped, because the choices were A. Annul the marriage, destroy the family structure, have the situation become public record, likely face CPS investigations. B. Stay married to my sister, continue the deception, live with the knowledge. Neither option was acceptable. But I had to choose one. In that position, what would you have chosen? What would you have done? Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I lived in a strange limbo. We continued our marriage. We continued our parenting. We went to work, came home, made dinner, helped with homework, put the kids to bed, but everything felt like a performance. I couldn't look at Sarah without feeling this overwhelming sadness and confusion. She was my wife, but she was also my sister. The two identities couldn't coexist in my mind. I loved her, but I was repulsed by the situation. Sarah was also struggling. She told me she felt guilty. She felt like she should have suspected something. She felt like she should have handled it differently. She said, I should have done more research before I told you. I should have been more certain. I said, there's nothing you could have done differently. This isn't your fault. But I also resented her. I resented her for finding the documents. I resented her for telling me. I resented her for putting us in this impossible situation. Rationally, I knew none of this was her fault. But emotionally, I was furious. We tried to see a therapist. We said we were having marriage problems. We didn't tell the therapist the real reason. The therapist said, there seems to be something deeper you're not telling me. We couldn't tell her. How do you tell a therapist that you've discovered you're married to your sister? So we stopped going to therapy. I started drinking more. Nothing extreme, but noticeable. Sarah would find me in the garage at night, sitting by myself, drinking beer. I was withdrawing from my children. I didn't want to play with them. I didn't want to read to them. I was present but distant. Sarah was doing the same thing. Our marriage was deteriorating, but we couldn't tell anyone why. About 8 weeks into this, Sarah's sister, my sister-in-law, though I guess she's just my sister-in-law still. The terminology is confusing, noticed something was wrong. She pulled Sarah aside and said, are you in okay? You seem off. Sarah said, we're fine, just stressed with work and kids. But her sister didn't believe her. She said, if something's going on, I'm here for you. You can tell me anything, Sarah almost told her. She almost revealed the truth. But she stopped herself. She told me later that she'd been close to breaking. She said, I can't keep this secret. I can't live like this. I said, we have to. For now, we have to. But I was reaching my breaking point too. This is what's so insidious about a secret this big. It doesn't stay secret quietly. It eats at you from the inside. It affects every relationship, every interaction, every moment of your life. Living with the knowledge that you're married to your biological sibling, and you can't tell anyone, is psychological torture. About 4 months after Sarah told me, we had a conversation about what to do. We were lying in bed, not sleeping. We rarely slept in those months, and Sarah said, we have to make a decision. I said, I know. She said, we can't live like this forever. The secret is killing us. I said, I know that too. She said, so what do we do? I said, I don't know. And I didn't. There was no good option. Every path forward led somewhere terrible. Sarah said, I think we should tell our parents. Both our parents. Your adoptive parents and mine. And my biological mother if she's still alive. We need to tell them what happened. I said, and then what? They're going to be horrified. They're going to want us to end the marriage. They're going to tell us we have to do something. Sarah said, I know. But maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need someone else to help us navigate this. I said, if we tell our parents, it spreads. More people know. The secret gets bigger. Sarah said, it's already too big for just us to carry. She was right. I knew she was right, so we decided to tell our parents. First, we told my adoptive parents. We sat down with them and explained the situation. We showed them the DNA test results. We explained what Sarah had found. My mother cried. My father was silent for a long time. My father said, when we adopted you, we didn't get information about biological siblings. We were just told there was a baby who needed a home. We had no idea you had a sister out there. My mother said, what are you going to do? I said, we don't know, but we wanted you to know first. They were supportive. They didn't judge us, but they were clearly struggling with the information. My father said, you should talk to a lawyer, a good one, someone who specializes in family law. This is bigger than we can advise you on. Then we told Sarah's parents. They were equally devastated. Sarah's mother blamed herself. She said, I should have known. I should have suspected something. This is my fault, Sarah said. It's nobody's fault. We didn't know. Sarah's biological mother was also contacted. She was shocked. She confirmed that yes, she had had a son in 1986 who was adopted out. She had never told Sarah about him. She said, I was young. I was scared. I couldn't take care of 2 children. So the secret spread. Our parents now knew, and they were struggling with it just like we were. The lawyer my father recommended was a specialist in family law and adoption cases. He was blunt with us. He said, your marriage is legally voidable in this state. If this becomes public, you would be facing potential annulment proceedings. I said, what about the children? He said, The children are a complication. If the marriage is annulled, questions arise about their legitimacy. This could trigger involvement from Child Protective Services. He said, "My recommendation is that you explore your options carefully. You could pursue an annulment quietly, perhaps negotiate it in a way that protects the children's status. Or you could choose to stay married, keep the knowledge private, and hope it never becomes public." He said, "Neither option is good, but those are your options." I said, "What do you recommend?" He said, "I recommend you talk to a family therapist who specializes in trauma. Because whatever you decide, you're going to need support processing this. If you were in this situation, would you annul the marriage and expose the truth? Or would you stay married and keep the secret?" It's been about a year since Sarah told me. We made a decision. We're staying married for now. Not because we think it's the right decision, but because we believe it's the least harmful option for our children. An annulment would require public disclosure. It would put us and our family through a process that would likely involve legal scrutiny, investigation, and exposure. Staying married means we can protect our children from that trauma, but it also means we're living a lie. We're in ongoing therapy, both individually and as a couple. Our therapist is one of the few people who knows the truth. She's helped us navigate the cognitive dissonance of being married to our biological sibling. She's explained to us that accidental incest, while extremely rare, does happen. And when it does, the psychological damage is severe but manageable with proper support. She's helped us separate the emotional reality of our relationship from the biological reality. She said, "You love each other as partners. You've built a life together. That doesn't change based on genetics. But you also have to process the trauma of the biological connection. Sarah and I have rebuilt our marriage, but it's different now. We're not romantic partners in the traditional sense anymore. We're partners in crime, so to speak. We're people bound together by an impossible secret. We're also people bound together by 3 children who will never know the truth. Our kids are happy. They have no idea that their parents are biologically related. They grow up in a stable home with 2 parents who love them. But Sarah and I live with the knowledge of what we are to each other. I don't know if this is right. I don't know if we're making the correct choice. But it's the choice we've made, and we're living with it. Sarah and I have talked about whether we'll ever tell our children. We've decided that we probably will eventually, when they're old enough to understand, when they're adults. But for now, they're protected from this knowledge. I also think about Sarah's biological mother. She had a child that she gave up for adoption. She had a daughter that she kept. And she never told either of them about each other. If she'd been honest about that, none of this would have happened. But that's not the situation we're in. We're in the situation we're in. I'm still processing what this means. I'm still working through the trauma and confusion. Some days I feel like I can accept this new reality. Other days I feel like I'm living in a nightmare. But I'm committed to moving forward. For my family. For my children. For the life we've built. What strikes me most about this situation is how little control we had over it. Sarah and I didn't choose to be siblings. We didn't choose to fall in love unknowingly. We didn't choose to have children together. All of that happened without us knowing. A fundamental truth about who we were to each other. The only choice we made was how to handle it when we found out. And even that choice was limited. We didn't have good options. We only had less bad options. I think about what could have prevented this. If Sarah's mother had been honest about her first child, if the adoption agency had provided more information, if my adoptive parents had known about my biological siblings, if Sarah's parents had told her the truth about where her biological mother came from. But none of that happened. And so we're here. I also think about the ethical implications of our situation. Is it wrong that we're staying married? Is it wrong that we're keeping this secret? From a legal standpoint, probably yes. From a moral standpoint, I don't know. The alternative annulment and exposure would harm our children. It would put them through trauma and scrutiny. By staying silent, we're protecting them. But we're also perpetuating a lie. I've read a lot about accidental incest cases. They're rare, but they happen. And in most cases, the people involved struggle with the same questions. Do we tell? Do we stay together? Do we expose ourselves to public judgment? There's no right answer. Sarah and I have also talked about whether we could have children with someone else in the future. Right now, we've decided not to have more biological children. The thought of genetic complications from sibling relations is too much. We're focused on raising the 3 children we have. We're focused on giving them a stable, loving home. We're focused on surviving. That's really what it comes down to. We're trying to survive with this knowledge. And we're trying to protect our family in the process. So that's the story. And what makes it so devastating is that there's no resolution. There's no closure. There's no moment where everything gets better. This couple discovered they're married to their biological sibling. They have 3 children together. And now they have to live with that knowledge forever. I want to ask you, what would you do? If you discovered you were married to your biological sibling, what choice would you make? And here's a harder question. Is their choice to stay married and keep the secret the right one? Or are they making a mistake that will hurt their children eventually? There's no perfect answer. But that's what makes this story so difficult. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think they should stay married? Should they tell the children eventually? Should they have annulled and faced public scrutiny? I genuinely want to know what people think about this impossible situation. Thanks for watching. If this story made you think about family, identity, and the impossible choices people have to make, please hit like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.